Hello, everybody. This is the next episode of the KAAMP. I'm Thomas Zachary, and this is the Knoxville Area Artist Networking Platform. And today we don't have a Knoxville creative with us. It's somebody I randomly took a notion to put a question into the ether, and they were receptive. And now I have today Matt Baum of Atlanta, Georgia, who is, or are you the only person in the band? It's all you, right?
Yeah, I'm a solo artist at this stage in this project. So before we go too much further, I just wanted to thank you for reaching out into the ether towards me.
I love
cool.
I love posing questions to the ether. But Matt here is and creates Watch Out for Snakes, the band, music. And I happen to enjoy it, and that's why I reached out into the ether. So here we are. Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. So, you're not from Knoxville, so you're kind of outside the format of the show, but I just decided it was my show and I'll do what I want. So, here we are on the phone. I really am curious about your workflow and creative process, because I understand almost nothing about your artistic expression, and I'm genuinely curious. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, for those people that don't know, the style of music that I make, it's a form of electronics that I've kind of lovingly dubbed chipwave, because it's a kind of a mashup of video game influenced chiptune music, and then synthwave, which is kind of this homage, kind of like a modern homage to like some of the 80s retro analog like synthesizer sounds that you would hear from like different soundtracks that were by like Tangerine Dream or John Carpenter, like synth pop acts like Depeche Mode and New Order, that kind of stuff. So there's been kind of like this like new wave of artists that has been coming out over the last like decade or so, that has like grown up with a lot of those musicians in the 80s as like our like initial influences. And so a lot of my music kind of basically draws from the same like 80s influences, and then I just kind of like work my video game influences into that as well, and that's how we end up with this kind of like mashup that I like to kind of shorthand refer to as Mario Brothers meets Stranger Things, I guess. My process for that, it's a little bit different, because I came at it from a different place than a lot of people in either the chiptune or the synthwave world came to their subgenres from. I've always just really been into like minimal synth sounds, and so I've been listening to a lot of. I'm trying to think who like some of the artists were that influenced me like coming into this project. There's a lot of I guess. Ooh, I should have been better prepared with this. I always have trouble with this question because there's just so many influences.
It's not an easy question.
I pull from, but I just enjoy trying to create new sounds, but not as much as I enjoy the composition aspect of things. And so the reason why I was drawn to like more minimal synth kind of instrumentation is that it was kind of like freedom within a framework, I guess. Like when I used to sit down and try and come up with new synth tones in previous projects that I'd been in, I just would tend to get overwhelmed by just the variety of different like tones that you could come up with, and it really kind of paralyzed me in a lot of ways. And I found a lot of the times that I wasn't even getting to the part where I was creating and like arranging a song. It was all focused completely on, the synthesization portion of music. And that for me, it's fun, but it's not like where I wanted my focus to be. So I kind of landed on like this video game instrumentation as both something that I had grown up with and felt like very connected to from a nostalgia point of view, and was interested in trying to like create there. But then I also knew that, you know, a lot of those earlier video gaming systems, like the Nintendo Entertainment System, only had the ability to express music in like 4 different channels. So you have basically like 2 pulse waves and a triangle wave, and then a sample channel, and that's all the composers at the time had access to. And so for me, it was kind of cool to restrict myself to that, because then I wasn't faced with like these limitless possibilities of actual like sound synthesis, and like it kind of freed me up to focus more on the composition side of things.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like when you get freaked out by the blank page, you know, there's so many options.
Yeah, exactly. So, so I guess getting back to your question, I mean, my process, it's like I was saying, a little bit different from like other chiptune artists, because a lot of chiptune artists are creating using hardware. So like you'll actually see chiptune artists that will have like a physical Game Boy that they're programming into, and that's kind of like their instrument essentially. And in my case, I use soft synths, so they're basically like emulators of some of those retro gaming systems. And I try and limit myself to just like tones and instrumentation that is specific to the Nintendo Entertainment System. Like I don't really like go into like Atari or Genesis or a lot of the other video game systems that were out there. So like the music that I create has like a very identifiable like quality to it. Like if you've played a lot of like old school Nintendo, and then I basically just mix some of those tones in with like a 707 drum sampler, and then also like a couple of like random synthesizers that are kind of taken from like old 80s kind of synth pop acts. So that's kind of how I arrived at my sound. And then as far as like actually writing the songs goes, and listening to some of the podcasts that you've done in the past where you're talking with musicians is not very different from some of the process that I've heard you talk about on the show before, where you know, for me it can come from like a dream that I have. It can come from like found sounds where, you know, I'm just out and about and I hear something that kind of like spurs an idea, or you know, if I'm like watching an old 80s movie and I hear a soundtrack in there and there's like an element to that kind of like sparks something that I might want to try in a song, then, you know, any of those can kind of be like the genesis of like whatever the next track is that I'm going to work on. But a lot of the times it's more of like an intuitive kind of process for me, where, you know, I just kind of will sit down with an idea already in mind based on however many different kind of song stubs that I've recorded into my phone, just like humming them or whistling them or whatever the case may be. So generally when I'm sitting down, I've already got kind of an idea in mind of like, you know, what general type of song I want to create. And sometimes it starts with a lead. Sometimes it starts with like a rhythm section. It just kind of depends on, you know, what the specific inspiration is for that track.
I enjoy that you pull inspiration from lots and lots of places. Like the found sounds and stuff, I hear them in the tunes sometimes. And I feel like that's one of those little things in a song that makes a person smile. Like, oh, that, you know, I enjoy that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to really get out and away from like whatever genre you're creating in, and really try and like step outside of that in order to bring new ideas in. Like a lot of the times I get flack from some of my peers because I don't go out of my way a lot to listen to the work that, you know, a lot of my peers are creating. And some of that is, well, actually, most of it is just that, you know, I don't want to fall prey to like basically becoming like derivative where, you know, I'm basically like a copy of a copy of a copy. Like I would like to think that, you know, the stuff that I'm creating is like more, I guess, directly derived from like the 80s stuff that I grew up with and like some of the old school like video game stuff that I also grew up with. So that's most of what I tend to listen to are, you know, some of those 80s composers and synth acts when I'm looking for inspiration.
So what are some of your first go-tos when it comes to like media when you want to be inspired or, you know, like have an idea bouncing around in your brain?
Yeah, I mean, it can come from like a bunch of different places. I try not to get too hung up on like the idea generation part of things. It's like one of those things where, you know, when you're not looking for it, I find is when it'll actually come to you. But you know, from like a just kind of immersive point of view, like I'll typically watch a lot of like 80s films. I'm specifically into a lot of like horror stuff. Like the cheesier the better generally, because that's where you'll find a lot of the you know, the synthesizer soundtracks are a little bit more entertaining just because a lot of the times they were being created on a low budget, and you know, so it's just one guy that was sitting there at a synthesizer just plugging away at stuff, as opposed to, you know, some of the compositions from back in the day. They had like full orchestra arrangements and everything. So yeah, you know, some of my favorite movies from the time are like The Thing and Blade Runner and like Alien. There's so many different influences, like Terminator is another big one for me. But I also just grew up with music in my house, and like my family would watch a lot of like old school films too. Like we're talking like 1930s films, where, you know, I'm watching like The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn and listening to the Oscar. I think it won an Academy Award for the soundtrack, but like Eric Wolfgang Korngold, he did the soundtrack for a bunch of movies from that time. But as a kid, I used to like prance around in like my Robin Hood costume, like listening to. There was always like something going on in my house, and I felt like my parents' job was exposing me to a lot of like, and a lot of varied music that was from a lot of different eras, I guess.
That's awesome. That's a great way to grow up, I think. It is important to be exposed to a lot of different things, especially forms of entertainment growing up, because sometimes you never know what's out there, and you can't just promise you're going to stumble upon it.
That's true. Yeah, I feel like I've had like a lot of great like musical influences in my life, and can kind of like point to different members of my family for having different, well, I guess having made their mark on me in different ways. Like, for example, my uncle was really influential to me because he's the one that introduced me to like David Bowie and Genesis, and trying to think who else. Just a bunch of like 80s bands that I used to like crank in my car all the time after I was old enough to drive. And then my sister, like later on in life, she's actually 3 years younger than me, but she actually she's always had better musical taste than I have had, I think. And so she actually introduced me to a lot of kind of punk and hardcore bands, and kind of like the late 90s, like early 2000s, that I wouldn't have otherwise come across. So it was it was nice having like those different members of the family just kind of pushing me and challenging me in different ways.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful. My dad sends me a lot of music. It's really funny. He's a bluegrass fan, and he'll send me all kinds of bluegrass links and stuff. So I get some influence thrown at me from his direction every now and again.
Nice.
What is it about composing and arranging these bits of music that you enjoy most? Like, is that really where you zen out and do the thing and find the happy part of this process?
I mean, I do enjoy like the composition aspect of things. I mean, and I'll kind of get into that in a little bit more detail in a second. But like, I mean, the part of music that I really enjoy the most is the live performance aspect of things. Like I do enjoy sitting down in front of a synthesizer or in front of the computer and writing and feeling the endorphins when, a song comes together in the right way and you come across like a solo part that you never would have imagined could really come out of you. You just kind of discover it. Or, you're struggling with a particular bass line for a while and then suddenly like you change one or two notes around and like goes from being this song that you've been struggling with for the last 2 days to like your favorite song that you've worked on in like the last couple of months. So that, I mean, that's definitely, my favorite part of like the composition process, I would say, is actually like writing the music. I'm not a big fan of like the mixing and the mastering part of the process. Like that's where my brain just kind of shuts down a little bit, because I'm just not wired that way. But yeah, live performance for me is really where it's at because I enjoy like the social component to like being in front of people and sharing my music and getting that feedback loop between me and the people that are in the crowd where, I'm having a good time playing the music. They can feel that energy. And then I see them having a good time as a result of like them seeing me on stage, and it just kind of keeps going back and forth in this like reciprocal, loop. So, that's really what I vibe out on the most. And it's one of the reasons why I play out like quite a bit, probably more than a lot of like other people and like my specific electronic subgenre.
So, where do you like to play?
Are we talking cities or like types of venues?
Both. You can answer that both ways because I would like to know both answers.
Okay. I mean, for electronic music in the U.S., it's a little bit different just because there's only certain cities that really have supportive scenes for that kind of music. And so those tend to be some of the larger cities. I mean, Atlanta, where I'm at now, it has a pretty good electronic scene here. But I would say aside from Atlanta, like you've got, I guess San Francisco is a really great place to play. They have an event out there called, Turbo Drive that is supportive of a bunch of different like retro inspired electronic acts. And they've been doing that event, out there at DNA Lounge for like years and years and years. So they've got like this really great like fan base built up around the event itself and, are really great about bringing in new acts from like around the world, really. So that's, one place that I've really enjoyed playing. Portland, Oregon is another place that I've really enjoyed because they have a pretty strong, synth scene there as well. And then I've also enjoyed playing in Brooklyn, just because they have like a really great, chiptune kind of like video game music scene there. There's a lot of kind of old guard, video game, musicians that are still in the like New York City area that again are just very they're super supportive people. Have come out for like multiple shows that I played there. So it's really great like having them in the audience. And then just getting the kind of fan reactions that I've gotten there. So, other than that, I've had the pleasure to play at MagFest, which is a huge gaming convention that's held in like the Baltimore area every year, and that's probably like those have been my best experiences or my favorite experiences so far, just because the crowd that shows out for this music and gaming convention, it's tailor-made for the type of music that I create, which is this blend of like video games, like nerdy kind of stuff, and then you know, just a little bit of like rock and you know, high energy. There's like a high energy fan base there, so it's a lot of fun playing that.
I would imagine that's a very target-rich environment.
Yeah, it's great. Like, I mean, it really does feel like a family when I'm there, and it's one of those events where, you know, every time I go there, I wish that every event could be like that, just because it's one of those things where I show up there and it's like, oh, you know, these are my people. Like, it's so good to like have like that all around you.
Yeah, I get that. Well, I'm glad you can have that. That sounds like an awesome event. The pictures I saw of you on stage recently, I think you look like you were having fun. I think you've posted a few to your Instagram. You definitely look like you were having fun.
Yeah, that was the pictures that you're referring to are from like this last MagFest, which is the event that I was just talking about, and that was my first time playing on like the main stage there, which was, you know, a pretty big deal for me. I think it was probably like the largest show that I've played to date in any of the projects that I've been in. And it was really cool, like being up there on stage. But then what was even cooler is the fact that I was able to partner up with a visualist on stage named Drip. And I haven't really met her before like the day of that event. And so I really had no idea what to expect, but it was so much fun having her on stage with me, because she was very high energy herself, and she had come up with all these really cool like background visuals that were themed around my project. And I was joking with everybody like during the show, like I got on mic and was telling everybody in the crowd that like I was having a hard time trying to pay attention to what I was actually playing, and fighting the urge of just like turning around and looking at the screen behind me to just watch what visuals Drip was displaying there. So, yeah, it was just cool, because that's like one of the first times in probably like 4 or 5 years that I've been on stage with somebody else. I've been in projects in the past where I was in full bands, and but you know, when I started this project, I kind of decided I wanted to do it solo, just because it was easier to schedule things, and I didn't have to worry about like, you know, wrestling around different creative decisions. And you know, by and large, it's been a good experience, because I've had that creative control, and I feel like I've been able to make Watch Out for Snakes into what I want it to be. But there are times where I definitely miss like the camaraderie that you get from like being in a band and sharing that experience on stage with other people.
Well, yeah, I get that. I don't, you know, me, when I live paint, it's normally not with lots of other people. So if it's just me, that's pretty normal. If it's me plus 2 more people, that's pretty out there. If it's me plus like 7 or 8 other people, that's something I've never done. So I get that. I really do. Do you play any instruments other than the guitar, like analog instruments?
So I grew up playing piano, which is, you know, arguably the same thing as guitar. It you know, different kind of mindset required for it, but, you know, essentially the same instrument. Aside from that, like I played oboe in middle school for a couple of years, but didn't really continue past like ninth grade with that. The funny story behind that is that originally in seventh grade when I joined middle school band, I really was interested in playing trumpet because that was like the cool instrument. You know, everybody wants to play brass and everything. And after about like I think it was maybe the second or third week where like I hadn't advanced beyond like being able to play the very first note that you were supposed to play. And like my band director took me aside and said, Matt, like, I know that you really have your heart set on trumpet, but, you know, have you ever thought about oboe? And I was like, what the hell is that? Like,
right.
I don't know what an oboe is. Like, this is marching band. Like, what is that? And so I kind of like begrudgingly took the oboe, and learned how to play that. And, my kind of attitude towards it changed pretty quickly when I realized that not only did I like get a lot of the solos during like all of our concerts and everything, just because like the oboe is generally like one of the solo instruments in like orchestra and everything. But in addition to that, like because of the way that like where the oboe is normally situated, you're sitting between like the clarinets and the flutes, and there was a bunch of girls in middle school that were playing in those sections. So I was happy to be sandwiched like in between and like the front row with them.
Yeah,
so,
all of a sudden oboe wasn't so bad.
Yeah, it ended up working out for me. I got all the solos and I got to hang out with all the girls. So
true rock star status in middle school band.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. Like the pinnacle was still like playing in jazz band, and even though I played piano, like most of like my learning on piano had been like reading sheet music and spending a lot of time like picking out the notes. Like I was never good at sight reading, and so like improvisation was not something that I was great at. So I have no idea what got into me to make me think that I would have a shot in hell at like actually auditioning and making it onto like or into the jazz band as like a jazz pianist or the jazz keyboardist. But I went out and auditioned for it and like went down in flames. It was like one of the more embarrassing moments of my life. Like one of those times where you feel like the cold sweat like beating on your forehead, and you're like, oh crap, like they just set this sheet music down in front of me and they're asking me to basically like sight read it on the spot, and like I have no idea how to play any of this stuff. So it was bad, but yeah, thankfully it didn't put me completely off from like performing music.
Well, that's really good. I'm glad to hear that. So, any other instruments outside the oboe and the piano?
So I own a guitar, which I started to try and teach myself probably 3 or 4 years ago, and just kind of like fell off of it. So it's something I still want to pick back up and learn. I actually have multiple guitars. I've got like an acoustic and then an electric. So it's kind of silly that I own them, but don't know how to play. So I want to rectify that one of these days. But, you know, time is difficult to find when you've got, you know, a bunch of stuff that you're working on and like your current musical project and then a bunch of other like shows that you're planning, you got coming up.
So when you took your social media hiatus a couple of weeks ago, did you have any sort of like goal of number of songs to write or anything like that? Did you have a primary goal going into that?
Really, my only goal was just to try and carve out enough time in my day, like away from social media, to actually be productive and write something. I didn't really go in with a specific goal in mind. And I mean, it would have been great if I could have kind of like sketched out a song, at least just kind of like rough something out. And I didn't quite get there. I ended up I ended up basically like writing 2 songs. And the reason I didn't end up doing that is because I liked those to where I had a hard time putting them down. Like I would kind of I think I roughed out the first 2 songs, and rather than like going like coming up with like these other, keep coming back to these and refine them and get them to a point where I felt like they were really solid. So I mean, it was really productive because I felt like I hadn't had that type of focused time in a while to just sit down and write stuff. So it was great being able to step away from social media for that. But, I'm a person that always kind of like bites off more than thinking. My to-do lists are always like 3 times long as they really should be. So I kind of went into it like some lofty goals, but kind of like anticipating that I probably wasn't going to get as much done as I wanted to, songwriting wise.
Well, that's fair. At least you understood that going in, but you still gave it, a good try.
Yeah. Yeah. It helps the limitations, I guess.
Right. So normally I would ask people around here, where I am, what it's like being a creative person in and around Knoxville, but you're not here. So what's it like being a creative person where you are these days?
So I love Atlanta. One of the reasons that I can't imagine living in another city is because of the music and art community that we have here. I've been in Atlanta since, I guess, 2006. So what is that, like 15 years now?
Yeah.
I guess it's 16 years now. Yeah. So, so I mean, I really enjoy it here. Like, I've gone to visit a bunch of different places. I've had the chance to like tour, through a lot of different cities. The reason why I always like coming back to Atlanta is because we've got kind of like a smaller, music community here. But because it's this great mix between having enough people within a particular kind of subgenre like electronic music to actually be able to put together some decent shows and have a lineup of artists for a lot of those shows. But it's also not so large that you kind of get lost in the mix. So, when there are like major headlining artists that are touring through Atlanta, it's relatively easy to try and petition to support them as like a local act, here. At least in my genre, what's been nice is that everybody who I've run into, playing music here, and performing with them has just been like really great, honest, like upstanding people. Like nothing about it is cutthroat. It's not like, you versus everybody else type scenario. Everybody really kind of like bands together to try and like raise everybody else up. So that's one of the things that I think I would really miss if I moved to a different city. Just because I have so many great like musician and artist friends here that are interested in trying to collaborate with each other and like just want to see everybody else do well. And yeah, there may be some moments where, people get a little bit like jealous that, somebody got like on a particular like concert bill that they wanted to get on, but like it's never anything where there's like super bad blood or whatever. Like everybody's pretty happy. Like just anytime that like somebody in our scene gets raised up and has an opportunity. So, I wouldn't say that that's been my experience, like in other cities that I've traveled to. And that may just be because I'm an out of towner in those cities and I haven't been there, or I'm never there for long enough to really like make a solid assessment about things. But I do feel like Atlanta kind of fits into like this middle ground where it's a large enough city where we've got, a lot of touring acts that are coming through. to kind of sustain the community on like a national level. But then we've got like a really strong local scene that really supports each other.
That's amazing. I feel like you don't get that everywhere. That's a gem of a thing.
Yeah, like I'm just curious because I've got you here. Like, what is your impression of the Knoxville music scene?
Oh man, it's busy. Knoxville has a lot of live music, and it's really proud of itself for having a lot of live music. And, I've got a buddy of mine that's playing 2 nights this weekend, and I know other people in other bands that have gigs coming up, like the people in my life that are giving music a serious shot here in Knoxville are playing gigs, like they're getting money and they're playing music and enjoying themselves. They're eating good, so it's awesome. That being said, there's a ton of places where one can play music in Knox County. So, there are a lot of opportunities to get on a stage or to get in front of people, and that's great. But I don't feel as if the visual art community has as much representation, which is kind of why I like to feature a lot of visual artists. Not that musicians obviously don't have a place here, because we're talking right now. It's definitely something I want to talk to people about. But I feel like there are more stages to perform on than there are walls to hang your art on. So I like talking to visual artists a lot, because I am one and I'm seeking those walls as well. So that's kind of an uphill battle sometimes. But the music scene is great, to your original question.
Yeah, I feel like that's always the struggle, right? Because like visual arts has like this, like there's like the duality to it where it's like, or a double-edged sword where it's great because it's something tangible that people can, and like in some ways sick at times, but because it's tangible, the physical space to be able to display and actually like expose people to I would imagine that creates like some different challenges. Like
it does.
And listening to some of the previous podcasts that you've done, I know like one conversation came up around like, the value of music versus like the value of like visual art. I'm always just like really like interested and like in that conversation, because it is something that musicians see like everywhere. But I think it's just interesting to me how people kind of approach like the value of like a creative work, and how they think about like the value that has with them. And my experience at least has been that people may not be willing to shell out money for like just a track itself, but if you offer them something tangible like a vinyl record or like a cassette tape, then suddenly it's got something like physical to it, and it's more of an art piece almost, rather than just like this sound that's kind of floating around in the ether. So
right. I much prefer in this way that I buy a physical object with a digital counterpart instead of the other way around, because you can advertise it either way. I would much rather buy a vinyl or I would rather buy a vinyl with a digital download so I can listen to it in a way I want to listen to it in my home. But I can also, have it on my phone and I can play it in the car, whatever.
Sure.
That utility is nice.
Yeah, I definitely think that's what it comes down to. Like a lot of people try and make it them or like an A versus B type thing. And I don't think that's what it is so much. I think it's more that like, it's not that people don't value music. It's just they've become more accustomed to having lots of options available to them. And so like when you're offering a product in that space, I feel like it's important to make sure that you're offering them, the options that they're, where you're able to like reach them, like where they want to listen to the music, as opposed to just saying like, oh, well, I'm only going to do digital, or I'm only going to do vinyl, or I'm only going to do this or that. Like that, people want to be able to connect with you. but like they want to be able to do it in a way that is like, meaningful for them, I guess.
Yeah, and if I can make an analogy to, looking at a painting, a lot of artists make stuff that means one thing to them but applies no context to the art on display. And then, whatever somebody sees in that piece of art when they're viewing it was brought to the viewing experience by the viewer. And I think it's important in art to leave space for that experience to be had.
Yeah. I think that's where like some of the most interesting parts of the conversation happen, honestly. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I definitely feel that and music as well. Like I try and leave things open-ended, which is, it's easier for me to do that since like most of my work is instrumental. Like there's no lyrics for people to like necessarily like read into in different ways. So it's even more kind of like open to interpretation in terms of like how people want to kind of, like just relate to my music.
It's easier for me when I listen to your music to find the groove, the metaphorical groove in the tune. And all of a sudden, it's one of those moments where you're going down the road and like your arm's hanging out the window and you got one hand on the wheel and you're bobbing your head to the song, and then you realize you're doing all those things. Mm-hmm. And then I look down at the speedo and I'm doing 85 and I'm like, what am I doing right now? Quick look in the rear view mirror to make sure that there's not sirens and flashing lights behind you. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I'm happy that you make an instrumental music for that reason, because in that way I sort of like stumbling into the music. Obviously you're driving the car, so your mind's elsewhere doing the thing, and then all of a sudden the thing isn't so intense and you can like settle into the music that's in the environment in the car, and it's awesome. I listen to a lot of music in the car. I drive around a lot, so that's a lot of time for me, for my unconscious mind, to just like play with ideas and enjoy music, or just be sort of still and quiet for a little while and just let it do its thing.
That's cool. Yeah, it's good to get that kind of feedback, because I'm always curious about like, when I'm looking at different like platform statistics. So like if I'm on Spotify and I'm looking to see like, oh, I've got like, like 30 listeners in Knoxville, say, like, I'm always curious, like, what are those 30 listeners in Knoxville doing when they're listening to my music? And like, what's the context around things? 'Cause you don't always get the full story around stuff when you're just looking at those metrics. So it's like meaningful to me to like go onto like my Bandcamp site and then read some of the reviews that people are leaving on like the albums, where they're really sharing with me like what the music means to them. Because like you were saying, that's like the extra piece, obviously like I wrote the music with a specific idea in mind of what it means to me, but like I said, I try and leave things open to interpretation so that other people can kind of attribute like their own meaning to it. And so it's really cool like reading kind of after the fact to see like what different people were feeling at a time when they heard one of my songs. And it may be something completely different than what I was feeling when I wrote it, but that's part of what makes music so cool to me.
Yeah, there's the expression 1,000 Ways to Skin a Cat is one of my favorites, because I feel like this is one of those scenarios where the novelty of life and being alive in this life and time that we have now, like you can stumble into anything, anywhere, anytime. And I feel as if most often that is a luxury. Like I was listening to a playlist of similar stuff to yours when I discovered your music, and for some reason to my ear your stuff stood out. So I looked down, hit the heart button, went back to it like the next day or whatever, and I just listened to the whole thing, all the songs you have on Spotify. But I just put it on in the house and went about my daily business, and that was just the soundtrack to my house for 3-4 hours, whatever it was, till I turned it off. But yeah, that's some shit that happens when I'm listening to your music. I'm doing whatever I need to do in my house creative wise, because my creative efforts aren't strictly confined to my studio. Sometimes I'll be out here like with my feet propped up on the couch or whatever, sketching out some stuff on a stretch canvas that I'm gonna go paint on in better lighting.
See, I've had this conversation with a couple of people over the last couple of weeks, but like I always get jealous of visual artists because you guys can kind of multitask a little bit, like when you're like doing your creative work. Like there've been so many times where like I want to be able to like put on music or look at something like while I'm working on my own music, but you can't multitask that way when you're working on a song in the same way that you might be able to like if you're working on something in the visual arts like field.
You know what? I've never thought about that, but you're totally right. And I'm sorry. I would have, if I couldn't do that, it would alter my creative process in some way. I don't know how, but it would definitely be different. I like to listen to a lot of different electronic music. Like I'll listen to drum and bass, I'll listen to psytrance, I'll listen to things similar to yourself. It's kind of all over the board and mostly instrumental. So that kind of thing is really the I don't like. It's not background music technically because it's important, and I choose to listen to it when I have it when I'm doing these things. Like it's an active part of the process. The music I choose when I choose to listen to music. So
yeah, I mean, you're not going to offend me by like saying that about my music, because like that's honestly where I developed the relationship that I have with like a lot of like the music that ended up influencing me, because I was in school and needed study music, and like putting something instrumental on, and generally it ended up being like a video game soundtrack or something. Just allowed me to kind of appreciate it, but without it being so distracting with me out of like whatever I was currently. So I had to create and just put those on loop, and ended up developing these relationships with a lot of these songs over time because I was just like listening to them so much, and they basically became like the soundtrack of my life for those couple of years. So, I mean, I'm never like offended by somebody that says like, oh yeah, I had your stuff on background while I was doing something else, because like, I mean, that to me is another simple way of relating to the music.
Well, awesome. I'm glad you have that point of view. That's I think that's a very comforting way to think about it. I honestly hadn't thought about it that way. Let's see. What do you want to talk like technical aspects of your workflow, like softwares, file formats, programs, things like that?
I mean, most of the work that the DAW Logic Pro X is what I use to do all of the arranging. There's a soft synth that I use, like I mentioned before, that basically emulates a lot of those old school video game sounds. It's called like float chip sounds. And it's pretty neat because it does emulate a lot of those sounds pretty accurately. The issue with doing it that way and not on like the analog hardware itself, actually programming on a Game Boy or like using a like tracker software, which is how like chiptune artists will typically make chiptune music. The drawback to not doing it that way is that like you're not subject to as many of the hardware limitations that you would be if you were making it on the actual like Game Boy or an actual Nintendo. There's just certain like sound characteristics that the soft synths are not able to like replicate, and then there are certain effects that are more difficult to carry off in like a soft synth environment than in like an analog kind of environment. So it can be a little bit challenging at times when you're trying to replicate, a specific sound or effect that is typically pretty easy to do in tracker software. But because you're not doing it in tracker software, it's just harder to do. So, um, but yeah, I mean that's pretty much it as far as like the hardware goes. When I perform live, I perform with a keytar. It's a Roland AX1. I got my first Roland AX1 off of eBay back in like 2003 when I was like playing in a hardcore band. Actually, we were like a melodic hardcore band, and I thought that it would be a fun hook to kind of get me out in the crowd and in the mosh pit and everything, actually like untether me from a keyboard stand. So I ended up ordering this keytar online and had that same keytar up until like 3 or 4 years ago. And I'd had to make like different electronic repairs to it over time, but it eventually like started to like fritz out enough to where I ended up having to get a new version of that model, but I've played with that same model of guitar for so long that I'm pretty familiar with how to set it up in a way that allows me to, change between different patches pretty easily in the middle of songs and like, trigger my songs to start and stop. Because when I'm performing live, I'm essentially performing to a backing track. And that backing track generally has like all the lead lines cut out of it, so that like those are the parts that I will end up playing live. But yeah, that's the other part of playing music, other than like the social media stuff that I really dislike is actually sitting down and figuring out how I'm going to arrange a song for live performance, because the trouble with electronic music is that it's very easy to sit down and write a full song without ever having to think about like the repercussions of like how you're going to perform it live. So you can come up with some like really badass stuff, and then you sit down to try and like actually figure out how you're going to play those parts live, and it can be really challenging, either because it requires more like technical skill than you have when actually like playing keyboard, or just because you've got like 3 or 4 different lead lines happening there. And so it's just like virtually impossible for you to actually play, even if you were playing with both hands and were a virtuoso. So yeah, challenging times in the past all right, I've got like this really complicated song here. Which parts during this part of the song am I actually going to play, and which parts am I not? So it can take a little while to try and figure out how to not only adapt the song for live performance, but also how to adapt it to the keytar, because the keytar only has so many registers available on it, and the way that I kind of program the keytar, in a lot of my songs, each register kind of corresponds to a different sound, or a different tone. So like when I'm performing live, I may be kind of like moving down or up an octave on the keyboard, depending on which octave I'm in, a different sound. So I kind of turns into a little bit of like a math puzzle almost, where I'm trying to figure out like, okay, well, I need like 4 or 5 notes to play this particular part, like with this particular instrument. I need to find an area of the keyboard that is not currently taken up with another instrument to like be able to play this one part. And so you kind of have to, it's like a jigsaw puzzle where you're trying to figure out like how to make everything fit so that you can actually play all the parts live that you want to play. So that can take some time, actually trying to figure all of that out. I find that takes more time to figure out how to arrange it on the keytar than it does to actually learn the part itself. Because a lot of what I'm playing, it's not that complicated. It's more just trying to like figure out like how it's all programmed in.
So that's more of that secondary work you make for yourself on accident by making the thing you want to work on.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's the thing, is that like, I mean, when I'm writing, I really try and write in like a very like free way, where I'm never really thinking about like, well, could I actually perform this live or not? So it can be freeing in some ways, but I also told myself early on that I didn't want to be one of those guys that just kind of like pushes play while I'm up on stage. And so a lot of the times it does end up really challenging me, because I may write a part in the studio that is kind of beyond my playing ability. And then when it comes time to actually like arrange it for live performance, I have to actually like train up to be good enough to play it live. So it's a good way to kind of keep myself on my toes, I guess.
So you enjoy that pressure and like pushing your boundaries in that way?
I do. I mean, I don't enjoy like the arrangement, like the technical arrangement aspect of it, but I do enjoy like the performance challenge of it, where like I know what parts I need to play. I've already got everything programmed into the key guitar. It's more just a matter of like playing it enough times to where I can do it consistently, and that's where, like, you know, a lot of my kind of like punk hardcore background comes into play, because I've always had this mindset where it's less about how well you play a part and more about like how much attitude and how much feeling you can bring to that part. So like I'm always less concerned with whether I hit a couple of wrong notes, and more concerned with like, well, did I have the right energy, and did I, you know, was I throwing down and like really kind of helping hype the crowd up and make them feel like they were a part of that experience. Because I've always, that's just always what I've appreciated when I'm in the crowd. Like I almost appreciate it more if I see somebody flub a couple of notes, because then that's giving me an experience that's different from like the studio recording. And it lets me know, hey, you know, what I'm receiving is something that nobody else will ever hear. You know, it's something special that's like unique to this one performance. And I feel like it helps kind of bridge. It just helps you bond with whoever's performing as a fan. In my opinion, you feel like you have like a special connection, that you're like sharing something a little bit, you know, special.
Well, I guess at that point, like the veil of immortality or idolatry or whatever's been broken, because, you know, obviously they messed up, they're human, and then that makes room for that connection to grow, I guess.
Yeah, that's always how I've seen it. Like I'm always less interested with somebody that like plays it perfectly, than somebody who like plays it imperfectly but does it with style, I guess. So.
Hey, style points count. They definitely count. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Style points count. Do you work with visual artists for your artwork, for your music, or do you find things you like and fold it in? How do you figure out what images you want to represent your music?
Yeah. So it just kind of depends from like album to album. Like I knew that when I started this project, like one of the ideas that I had for like the album concept was like on my first album Upgrade, was that it was going to be like the soundtrack to a video game that never really got made, or, you know, just kind of like an imaginary video game. And so I've always been really inspired by like the old school Konami games like Castlevania and Contra and like Life Force, and the visual identity for a lot of like those video game covers used like the same template like time and time again. And so it had like a very like distinct like visual brand to it all. And so that's something that I knew I wanted to do going into like that first album from like an album cover perspective. And for that album, I already had kind of like the concept in mind of, you know, what the album overall meant to me, and like what the kind of themes were through it. And so when I was working with the illustrator at the time, I just kind of pitched to her like what the album meant to me and everything, and just kind of let her interpret that visually. and that's how we came up with the cover art for Upgrade. Scars and Fight Those Invisible Ninjas. Like I didn't have those concepts as concretely in mind when I went and started like collaborating with those visual artists. So it was really more those covers ended up being more their interpretation of the music itself, and then like I ended up kind of like retrofitting some of the themes based on like some of the visuals that they ended up creating. So there was a little bit of like back and forth there where like, you know, they were getting inspiration from the music that I had written, and then I was like getting inspiration from the visuals that they had done to kind of help inform the final narrative that like the album was kind of exploring. And I'm kind of following a similar process for like this current album that I'm working on, where, you know, I'm just kind of collaborating with an illustrator, and I've got like most of the songs written already and have shared that with him. And he's in the process of, you know, just kind of like concepting some ideas, and then there's some back and forth as we're just kind of saying like, oh, well, you know, we could do this or this. And so it's more of a dialogue, I guess. But at the end of the day, like I always pick illustrators whose work I respect and who I trust to do a good job. And so I know that no matter what they end up doing, I'm going to be happy with it, which like allows me to just kind of let them have free reign and kind of inject their own creativity into whatever that final album art ends up being.
I like that you allow that space for that conversation between the art and the music. I appreciate that as a visual artist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's my biggest fear is that you ever want anybody to feel they're working on a project with me to work on where it's like a total drag, and like they're like not looking forward to having to sit down and actually work on this. I always want them to be able to explore through it so that like they've invested. Basically, they're just invested in like the project to the same degree that I am.
Right.
I feel like that's where like true creativity happens in my.
That's definitely a good place for creativity to happen, for sure. I agree. Matt, I've had you for a little over an hour now. I'm gonna talk us out here in a minute. But since I didn't ask you to do it at the top of the show, will you tell us where to find your glorious music on the old internets?
Sure. If you're into streaming, my music's everywhere. It's on like all the streaming platforms, so like Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, like all those different platforms, wherever you like to get streaming music. But if you really want to support me and make sure that, you know, the most money is going to like the musician, you can catch me on Bandcamp, and that's watch out for snakestheband.bandcamp.com. I've got like all my albums up there available. I've got like a bunch of like shirt designs available there too. And then some, you know, each album is available on different merch. I've got like a vinyl release. I've also got like a cassette out. And then exclusive to Bandcamp, like some covers and things like that you can't find on any of the streaming platforms. So yeah, that's probably the best place to find me is Bandcamp. And then you can also, if you're also looking to see like where I'm going to be playing, whether I'm going to be playing near you guys anytime soon, then like Bandcamp also like has a like a tour feed there, so it'll show like my upcoming shows there in the sidebar. So that's another good source of information. Nice,
glad to hear that. Do you have, since we're in the middle of that a little bit, do you have any shows soon? Anything people should look out for in the next, you know, late spring, early summer?
Yeah, what's exciting is, so I've got two major things. I'm going to VGM Con, which is in like the Twin Cities area. So like Minnesota, that's happening in like early April. And I'm excited for that because I've never been to VGM Con before, but it's going to be a bunch of like nerds that geek out over like video game music, getting together and like sharing music with each other. And there's going to be a bunch of fans there, probably like dressed up as different video game characters and dancing around and having fun. So that'll be a solid time. And then what I'm super, super excited about is that I'm actually going on my first like full US tour in like the May-June time frame. So I'm going to be flying out to San Diego and then setting out from San Diego with two other artists named Street Cleaner and Morris Black, who are good friends of mine. And we're going to basically like make our way by van up the West Coast and then like over to the Midwest and basically like over to like the New England area, cut our way down and like back over through the South. So there's a bunch of dates that are up right now that you can find on Bandcamp that correspond to that tour. So chances are we're playing, pretty close. I'm looking now to see whether we've got like a Tennessee date. I'm not sure that we do, but I know that we will be playing in like Charlotte, North Carolina.
That's not a far drive for me.
Yeah, I think that's about the closest that we'll get to the Knoxville area. But yeah, we've got a bunch of dates up there. So if you're traveling around at the time, definitely look and see whether you're going to be at the same place that I'm at that time, and would love to meet people and see people out in the crowd. So.
Yeah, I would definitely like to see you. So if we can cross paths that way, I'll try to make it happen.
Awesome.
As for now, I really appreciate your time and being kind enough to answer a question that was tossed into the ether, as it were. And man, I hope you have a good rest of your evening. And like I said, I really do appreciate your time. This is Matt Baum of Watch Out for Snakes, and I'm Thomas Zachary, and this has been the KAAMP. If you wish to support the podcast, you can do the thing that is available in Anchor. You can listen to my ads if you care not to skip through them. You can buy physical art from the Twisted Wrist, aka me, or you can share the podcast and tell people they need to put it in their ear holes, because they do. But thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening. Have a good night.